Hi, and welcome to my sewing room. My name's Leah, and today I'm excited to finally show off what I made with the winner of the last mini bolt challenge. If you're just joining me, at the beginning of the year, I challenged myself to use up my mini bolt stash by having you help me pick one bolt each time to use up all the way down to the very last scrap. For this round, you picked the pink geo fabric, and let me tell you, it turned into something I didn't expect, but in a very good way. I designed a whole new quilt called Bubble Flowers, and I used up the tiniest scraps into some fun projects. Let me walk you through my process. The first step was to measure how much fabric there was on the mini bolt, and I ended up having 1 yard to work with. During my past mini bolt challenges, after I measured the fabric, I'd start pulling other prints that would go with it based on the colors in that main print, and then I would design a pattern based on the colors I picked. But this fabric only had 2 colors, pink and white, and I really wasn't feeling about making a 2-color quilt. But after some sketches and playing around in EQ first, I finally came up with a pattern. I landed on snowball blocks and I turned them into pink flowers. My first version had the snowball blocks separated a bit and had some elongated quarter square triangles for sashing. I even printed it out and was going to cut everything out, but there was just something about it that had me hesitating. So I went back to EQ and I tweaked it a little bit. I put the snowballs next to each other and changed out the sashing for rectangles. I printed out my fabric requirements and pulled out more mini bolts to find the perfect prints. The first color I needed was a light yellow. I don't have a lot of really light yellow, and it was looking that my only option was this print with the white dots on it. EQ8 said I needed 1.25 yards, but when I measured it out, I was a bit short. Sometimes EQ8 is a little off on yardage, so I decided I would keep this print for now and see if I could squeeze out enough to get all my shapes. After that print, I needed a darker yellow for my flower centers. The first few I pulled out were some good contenders. Some of the others, like this one, were not the shade I was going for. This one does have some fun geometric lines, but the yellow was darker than I wanted. This one was a nice shade and had some nice white triangles in it, but it wasn't the shade of yellow I was looking for. This next one is a good shade, but when I compare it to the other two, I felt like the white lines in the one on the left was more fitting, as it blended well with the white lines in the pink print. I decided that was the winner for now, but I had a few more prints to audition. This one was too cheddar, and this last one was a nice print, and it even had some white in it, but I preferred the coloring in the lines in this other one best. So it was the winner for my flower centers. The rest of the yellows went back on the shelf. Next up were my pinks. This is a big quilt, and I only had enough of the main print to make half of the blocks, so I alternated them with a dark pink and a light pink. So I needed to find a lighter pink that played well with my main pink. This first one was okay, but I wasn't in love with it. The next one was better, but I wanted to make sure I had enough of it. I did a quick check and I had enough to make the other half of the flower blocks. So that one was the winner for now, but I still wasn't sold on it. So I kept going through some of my pinks. This one looked okay. It was a maybe. This next one looked a little too busy. I wanted the main pink to be the busy one and the lighter one to be a little calmer, so it was a no. This one was also a no. There was too much going on. It did look good with the yellow though. I almost had a contender with this one, but when I measured it, I didn't have enough. I was liking the colors in this print. It was the closest in shading to my main print. The swirls were really pretty, but it looked too busy for me. This lighter one I liked, so much so that it bumped out the one on the right. It's actually a lighter version of the print on the left. While these two were nice, they really didn't have the same hue that I was going for. So I tried out this really light pink, but it was a no. Another bright pink with dots, I just wasn't feeling that one either. Now this one looked nice. It was a little lighter, so I felt I might be able to get away with it not being the same hue. This one was the perfect color, but not enough on the bolt. This is an older print, and it has the right hue, but again, not enough on the bolt. The next couple ones were no's as well, and I even realized I had the same fabric rolled up on a separate mini bolt. I will have to combine those two. Next, I decided to try out some purples, just in case. I didn't mind changing up the colors of the flowers if I had a perfect purple that would fit. But I wasn't loving any of those, and my last few pink options were no's as well. Again, this main pink was a hard pink to match. I did have one print that was really close. This last one with sunglasses on it, but I decided I didn't want to have flower petals with sunglasses on it, so I went in the no pile. That left me with 3 contenders. I narrowed it down to 2, then finally decided to go with the lighter print, as it had more of the hue as the main print than the other 2. Now that I had my pinks, it was time to pick out some blues. I needed 3 blues, so I pulled several different shades from my stash that I thought would play well together. I needed a light, medium, and a dark. So I started out with one of each and started playing from there. The first 3 were mostly teal, so I pulled out more of a bluish shade to compare. But then I saw this teal butterfly print, and I swapped out the darker teal. So far, it was the #1 contender. but I decided to audition the others I'd pulled just in case. I had a couple more teals and some blues, but I wasn't feeling those. I did find this lighter blue that I liked better, so I swapped it out for the light. Next were some purplish blues. The first one was a no. The white snowflakes were just way too big. I really liked this second print though, so I pulled a medium blue to see if I should use a darker blue palette instead of teal. I had another dark teal. I liked this print and the circles were fun, but it didn't beat out the butterflies. And this is Carl. He seldom comes in the sewing room, so this is a treat to see him on the cutting table. For some reason, Carl's not enticed with the sewing room as Avi and Bunky are. Okay, a few more teals. I like this print and it would look good, but I'm not sure if I want to cut up these lines. If my cutting's off, you'd be able to tell right away. These flowers were a no. Another dark teal. This print is pretty, but it wasn't the right shade. Another blue with lines. It would match the lightest teal, but again, I didn't want to work with lines. I decided to stick with the teal colorway, so I put the blues to the side. For the light blue, I had to decide between two prints. The bottom one was nice. I just had to decide if I wanted to have these white lines in my skinny strips. I know I want this center teal, so I paired up my contenders with that. For the dark teals, I still had this line print. I really liked the coloring, but again, wasn't sure about the lines. I asked my son for his opinion and he immediately picked the butterflies without hesitation, so that's what I went with. For the light teals, he picked the less busy print, so I went with that. And with that last choice, all the colors were picked out and it was time for cutting. The blocks in this quilt are made up of snowball blocks, full snowballs and partial snowballs. And to get that, you need to cut the corner off and sew on a little triangle. You can also do that by keeping the ear square and then sewing on little squares in the corner. To do that, you'll draw a diagonal line on the little square and then sew on the line and then trim. But I didn't want to draw 400 lines. So I went ahead and used my template and cut off those corners. I started by cutting out the main print. I needed 80 snowballs with 3 corners cut out and 40 with 2 corners cut out. These units measure 4 inches when finished, so I cut several strips at 4.5 inches long and cut out 80 squares. Then I used my template to trim off the corners. The next unit I needed from this fabric was the triangles that would surround the center snowball for each blocks. But I only needed 40, enough for 10 blocks, as these pieces would go with the light pink snowballs. And I'll have the light pink flank the yellow centers of the main pink print. I also cut out the snowballs in light pink for the alternating blocks. Next up was the darker yellow print for the flower centers. My template didn't print out right for this one. It was coming up a little short on one side, so I decided to use the one with 3 sides and rotate it to cut off the 4th corner. Since I wasn't sure I'd have enough of the light yellow, I decided to go with the next easiest cut, which was the teal prints for the sashing and the border. I started with the light teal, then cut enough of the medium teal to match, and I finished up with the butterflies, which will be the first inner border. For the final pink border, I didn't have enough of the same light print, so I went with runner-up number 2 and I cut out 8 strips. When everything was cut out, I was left with a medium-sized skinny strip, a larger strip, several smaller strips, and lots of tiny triangles. These tiny triangles didn't quite cover a 1-inch square, so technically I could have filled them out, but I decided to keep them around a bit just in case. So this was everything I needed other than the light yellow for the quilt. I have my dark and my pink snowball centers, my yellow snowball centers, my sashing and borders, and my pink snowball triangles. I went ahead and sewed a few of the pink ones just to see what they would look like. As far as the light yellow, I cut a row to see how many triangles I could get, and I won't be able to get enough triangles and rectangles from the yardage I have left. I was hoping EQ8 might be a bit off, but they were right on the money this time. I had ordered another light yellow that had a more geometric print on it, but it was being held up in shipping, so the new plan was to make half of the blocks the dark pink ones, using the original light yellow, and this lighter flowery yellow print for the lighter pink blocks. I have enough of each to make 10 blocks, so 10 light pink flowers and 10 dark pink flowers. Since I already started on these yellow centers, I finished sewing those first. I sewed half with dark pink triangles and the other half with the light pink triangles. I did cut the pink triangles a tiny bit bigger so I wouldn't have to worry about that part of the triangle disappearing as I sewed, but that meant I would have to trim them all down. I did some assembly line cutting and I got them all to a nice 4.5-inch square. After that, I opted for some quick easy sewing and sewed all the light teal strips to a medium teal strip and pressed them all. That gave me 20 strip sets, which I trimmed down to 6.5 by 3.5-inch sashing units and 2.5 by 3.5-inch cornerstone units. When I did the cutting, I stacked 2 on top of each other with pretty sides together, with colors on opposite sides of each other. You can see when I opened them, they were already lined up together to sew. This can actually save a lot of time at the sewing machine. Instead of fully lining up 2 pieces when I get to the sewing machine, I just have to do a tiny adjustment to make sure they're still together before I start sewing each piece. I went ahead and sewed the cornerstones first. I only needed 30 of those and they sewed up pretty fast. Next was the sashing strips, but I had to be careful how I sewed these together. They are not all laid out the same. I went ahead and attached one of the strips to the cornerstones to show you what I mean. I want all the medium teal to alternate through the cornerstones and all the sashing. That means the horizontal sashing strips need to have the medium teal in the top left, and the vertical rows need to have the light teal in the top left. At first glance, it looks like you can just rotate it, but when you do, you realize that's not the case. So I had to be careful of how I sewed them together. To do that, I put two pieces together and made sure the light teal was on the top as it went through the sewing machine for the horizontal rows, and the medium teal was up on the top for the vertical rows. With the sashing and cornerstones complete, it was time to tackle the pink snowball blocks. That meant I needed to cut out the yellow triangles. There were a lot of those. Each block needed 16, and there were 20 blocks, which comes to 320 yellow triangles. I cut out 160 in the yellow with the white circles, and the yellow with the floral print on it. While I was cutting yellow, I also cut out the 4.5 by 2.5 inch rectangles I needed for the side corners of the finished flower block. Each block needed 4, so that's 80 rectangles, 40 in one print and 40 in the other. Sewing on 320 triangles did take a bit of time to sew and press. I worked through all the main pink print first, then I tackled the lighter pink. It did take a couple of sittings to finish them all, and I didn't time myself this time around. I just sat back, relaxed, and sewed, and I listened to an audiobook. Each block got a nice press to help hold those triangles down, and as you can see here, my yellow triangles were slightly bigger than I needed. I would rather sew big and cut down than not have enough triangle to sew to the next block. So I did another trimming session. This one took a bit longer as well, since I had 120 units this time around instead of 20. But I don't mind the trimming. It gives me the perfect size unit and makes sewing the quilt block so much easier as everything always lines up nicely. It also means my quilt blocks have a better chance of coming out to the right size, which means I can cut my borders to the correct size and they will all fit. Putting the blocks together is always fun. This is where the hard work making all the units starts coming together. Since these have units that have to be turned a certain way, I wanted to make sure I didn't sew anything on backwards. So I laid out all 20 blocks on top of each other to make sure all my units were in the right direction. This block has 3 rows, but it isn't quite set up like a 9-patch. My top and bottom rows have those side rectangles, but it helps even everything out visually. Here's another view of how the blocks go together. You start with the center yellow, then flank it with 2 pinks with only 2 yellow corners. The bottom row uses the pink squares with 3 yellow corners. They are sewn together, then the yellow rectangles are added. The top row is sewn just like the bottom row, and when you flip it around, it creates the mirrored image top row. I took a pile to the machine and chain pieced it in different sections. This did take a bit of time for some of the snowball blocks, as I had to pin where the yellow corners came together, so everything would line up nicely. When all my rows were done, it was time to sew those together to make my blocks. I didn't have to worry about lining anything else up, as I didn't have any more seams that came together, so it was quick to sew these mini rows together. I sewed 10 light pink blocks, and then 10 dark pink blocks. I gave each block a good press and got them ready to add sashing. The quilt is made up with rows of dark and light print blocks, alternating with sashing in between. My first row will start with a dark pink block, but to make it easy, each block got a sashing sewn onto their right side. Only 5 will get one sewn to both sides. After each block got a sashing sewed to the side, I sewed them together in pairs until I had 5 rows of 4. I put 2 rows up on the wall just to get a feel for what it was looking like. I flipped one row around to make sure my blocks alternated from row to row as well. With the main rows down, I just needed to sew the sashing rows that went between them. This came together pretty quick, and I didn't have to pin them as the seams butted up nicely next to each other and helped keep everything in place. I needed a total of 6 sashing rows. Once those were done, I paired them with my main rows and started sewing rows together. Since I've been timing myself while I sew this year, I've come to realize that it takes longer than I initially thought to sew rows together. Even though I considered this part the home stretch, it still took a bit of time to pin and press and make sure everything lined up right. Once all the rows were together, it was time to add the fun butterfly teal border. My top was measuring the right size, so I cut my borders and pinned them on. Even though I cut the border to the right size, I still like to pin to make sure I don't get an extra bit of fabric hanging off the end. Next came the pink border. I did a quick pin and sew on all sides, and it was ready for quilting. Bunky was behaving himself this time, so he got to stay in the room while I quilted it. I decided to go with some quick quilting and did an all-over meander swirl. It was easy, yet still a little bubbly with all the random swirls. With the last quilt stitched in, it was time to take it off the frame. This moment never gets old. I love seeing it in all its quilty goodness. After his nap during the quilting, Bunky decided he wanted to be a little more hands-on during the binding. With his expert supervision, I was able to get the binding on without any issues. And with that, I had used up most of the pink fabric. It makes some pretty good bow flowers. The petals remind me of pink bubbles from bubblegum. so I decided to call this one Bubble Flowers. I could probably call it Bubblegum as well, but I'll stick with Bubble Flowers. Here you can see a close-up of the quilting. It gives some nice movement to the rectangles and squares in the sashing, and looks pretty good against the pink petals. I think it shows that even simple quilting can look really good. So if you're worried about putting a simple meander quilting, just go for it. It can still look fantastic. To save time, I decided to skip the fancy piece backing like I normally do, and opted for one long seam and covered the whole back in a pink floral print. So what do you think about Bubble Flowers? It wasn't a direction I originally saw myself going. I honestly didn't know which direction I was going to go when I first measured out this fabric, so I'm pleasantly surprised at the results. I'm loving the teals and yellow that go along with it. It makes it fun and whimsical, but even though I had finished my main project, I still had some scraps that I needed to use up. When I cut the corners off those snowballs, I was left with a plethora of tiny triangles. Well, I decided I couldn't let them go to waste, and I had the perfect idea for them, even the yellow and the pink ones. I paired them with some tiny white triangles, and I sewed 400 tiny half-square triangles. Yes, 400. That's 800 pieces if you count the white triangles and the colored ones. It was definitely a lot of tiny piecing, and honestly, I really enjoyed it. Tiny quilt units are just so cute. Now, 400 tiny half-square triangles is a lot, and I didn't want to lose any, so I kept them chained at the ironing board and I cut them in sections as I pressed them. From there, I turned them into 100 tiny pinwheel blocks, 40 dark pink, 40 light pink, and 20 yellow. The goal was to turn them into a small throw quilt, but with each pinwheel measuring 1 1/4 inch finished, I needed to add some borders to each pinwheel so I could work with bigger blocks. I started by adding a white side border. Now these pinwheels were not perfect, but I decided to skip the trimming of each individual pinwheel and decided to trim the white instead. So it looks like my white sides are a little too big, and that's because they are. Once I got both sides on, I trimmed the white sides to match the top and bottom of the pinwheels. I lined my ruler up with the center line of the pinwheel and cut the top. Then I used that new line to make sure I had a smooth rectangle when I cut the bottom. When all those were trimmed, I sewed on the top and the bottom white pieces. And this is where the photos end for this project. I got in such a groove that I forgot to take any more pictures until I had a finished quilt top. I had messed around with the layout for a bit until I got the colors spread out in a way that looked good to me. Usually that means it ends up pretty symmetrical. And yep, that's how it turned out this time too. Some wavy line quilting and pink binding finished this one off. And it's so cute. I love all these tiny pinwheels. I think this is my favorite newest quilt. And it all came from throwaway triangles. When deciding on a size, I knew I wanted a rectangle quilt. So I decided to use a layout of 9 blocks across and 11 down. That used up 99 pinwheels with one left over. A light pink one. The block measures 4.5 inches and I only had one, but I had the perfect plan for it. I decided to pair it with the biggest leftover pink strip I had, and I made a cute zipper pouch. I trimmed the pinwheel block a little smaller, offset it with some of the leftover pink fabric, and paired it with a teal zipper. The size of the pouch was determined by the width of that big leftover pink scrap. It was 4.5 inches tall and about 15 inches wide, so after seam allowances, it came to about 4 by 6.5 and is ready to hold a few small items or little treasures. After making the zipper pouch, I still had more scraps left over. Several triangles, a few 1.5 inch squares to make 9 patches out of, a long skinny strip, and a smaller strip. I decided to tackle the triangles for 9 patches first. These are going into a long-term Scrappy project I'm building up slowly. It's fun to have a few 9 patches made from the leftovers of other projects. It's like a memory quilt building itself over time. Next, I worked with the last of the triangles, and I sewed 2 more little pinwheel blocks, and I used those and I turned them into cute little pincushions. These are a little shorter, so they're perfect for my short pins. They measure about 2.5 inch square with stuffing, and they're about 1.5 inches tall. I used some leftover flannel for the bottoms. These were pretty quick to make and didn't take a lot of pieces. I fused a little fleece to the top of the pinwheel and added some stiff pellon to the bottom piece to help make them just a little bit sturdier. Then I cut out the 4 sides. Each side is its own piece, and when sewing them together, I started and stopped a 1/4 inch away from the edge. I sewed each one together to make a cute little tube. Then I sewed each side to the top pinwheel block, making sure to start and stop again a 1/4 inch away from the sides. This does get a little fiddly, working with such a small piece, but a little patience and a pin every now and then helped get it sewn together. I did the same for the bottom, sewing a 1/4 inch away from the edge and adjusting the fabric underneath to make sure it didn't get caught in any of the seams. The only difference on this one is that I left a little section unsewn for turning. I love flipping it inside out. You go from all the raw edges to instant coolness. From there, I filled it with some stuffing and then I hand stitched it closed. I really like the look of this blue one. I didn't stuff it as much, so it's a little thinner. They're both really light though. Sometimes I stuff these with walnut shells. I've read online that those walnut shells actually help keep your pins sharp, but I didn't have any on hand, so these get a little bit of fluff in them. You can make a bunch and make a little stacking tower. They can be fun little blocks for toddlers to play with. With those 3 extra items sewn up, I still had 2 small bits left. I thought about making another zipper pouch and using those as tabs, but decided I wanted to make something a little different. So I trimmed them up and I made 2 cute little coasters. I was liking that little blueprint that I had used for my pincushion, so I went ahead and used that for the stars on these here. From there, I added a little tiny border all the way around, some nice flannel on the back, stitched them up, and they're good to go. So there you have it, the Bubble Flowers quilt, an adorable pinwheel quilt, a fun zipper pouch, 2 cute little pincushions, a few more 9 patches for my 9-patch stash, and 2 patchwork coasters, all from 1 yard of fabric. With that pink yard of fabric on, I'm down by 1 mini bolt. But I still have a lot to go if I want to use up my stash. So let's pick out the next one. This time around, I'm ready to work with some fall themed fabrics. So I have 3 oldies but goodies for you to choose from. First up is this fall leaf print with different shades of leaves. Looks like I might have a little more than a yard on here. Second, we have these fall trees. This one also looks like it might have a little bit more than a yard on it. And third, I have this beautiful orange leaf fabric with a hint of gold in it. This one definitely has way more than a yard. There's also some extra scraps folded up inside. So which one should I use in the next mini bolt challenge? Let me know in the comments below, and on Tuesday, October 21st, I'll tally the votes, and the fabric with the most votes is the one I will use up all the way down to the last scrap. My original goal was to sew up each mini bolt in 1 month, and even though this one took way longer than a month, I'd still like to get back on track and try to do it within a month. So come back near the end of November and see which one of these 3 mini bolts won, and to see what I make with them, all the way down to the very last scrap. If you want to make sure you don't miss the video, make sure you're subscribed and click the notification button. That way you'll know when the next video pops up. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and let me know in the comments below which project was your favorite. And don't forget to vote on which mini bolt you want me to use up all the way down to the very last scrap. And until next time, happy sewing.